months. Imagine your child having absolutely no words by 16 months, not even dada or mama. Envision your baby not even babbling by 1 year old. Not what you expected from your new child. Would you think this is odd? Well, yes, it is. This is reality for parents born with a baby with autism. Autism affects 1 out of every 150 children. Boys are 4 times as likely to get autism than girls. Autism is the fastest growing disability in the U.S. Autism is a complex developmental disorder that affects a child's verbal and nonverbal communication skills and ability to interact with others. Normally, kids with autism have trouble communicating clearly with other people. If you ask a person with autism a question, you will see that it takes them a long time to answer, if they answer at all. They aren't ignoring you, it just takes them longer to process the questions. Typical symptoms include uninterested in the world around him, unable to develop nonverbal communications like facial expressions, failure to establish friendships, delayed response to simple questions or even inability to respond, problems continuing simple conversations, unusual focusing on certain parts of a toy, like focusing on the wheels of a car instead of playing with the car itself. It is shocking news when a child is diagnosed with autism. Some people go through stages of grieving when they first hear the diagnosis, and some people actually refuse to accept that they have autism. They may become angry with the doctor or psychologist who diagnosed their child. Some say that when their child was diagnosed with autism, they felt like they were getting on a plane, they were planning a trip for Paris, France, but instead got on the wrong plane and landed in Iraq instead. In other words, they thought they'd have a typical child, and they had a view of what parenthood would be like, but instead they had a baby with autism and it wasn't the plan. This is a quote by Joshua Muggleton about autism, and it caught my eye. We are not born to suffer, we are born to thrive. If you live in a dry area and your garden receives little water, you choose plants which like dry soil. But when you are given a plant that likes wet soil, you don't kill it, you water it. You spend one of your 1,440 minutes each day watering that plant. Because you know that given the right care, that little bit of effort can produce spectacular blooms, and so it should be like with children like us. I think this quote means that kids with autism aren't born to suffer, they're born to thrive. And if you have a child with autism and he needs a different type of care, you should give it to him. You should give him the help he needs and let the child grow. You may need to adjust your expectations to nurture and give your child what he needs. His needs may be difficult for you to understand, and if so, you may need a major attitude adjustment. What can be done? There is no cure for autism. Research is being done, and it shows that medication helps reduce problematic behaviors, but they do not cure autism. There are also types of therapy, including applied behavior analysis, relationship development intervention, occupational therapy, nutrition. And occupational therapy helps with sensory issues, but there is no cure at this time. Imagine your baby having autism. Life would be different, wouldn't it? Yes, it would. I have a brother with autism, and I know his life would be a lot different if he was born a neurologically typical kid. You may think that autism is just hard to live with, but that is not true. Kids with autism are sweet most of the time and extremely interesting to live with. Although there are often unusual challenges for us, I think getting to know kids with autism is an interesting and enjoyable experience.
Today I'm going to be talking about guitar history. There are many different types of guitars, and I'm going to talk about 3. The first is the original acoustic guitar. You see it all the time in movies, TV shows, and in some teen homes. Then there is the classical guitar, with its soothing sound of its pluckable nylon strings. And lastly, ending with the heavy metal and hard rock electric guitars. The acoustic guitars are used for country, hymns, worship, pop, jazz, rock, pop, and many other kinds of music. During the mid-ages, guitars with 3, 4, and 5 strings coexisted. They were called guitarra latina and came from Spain and or elsewhere in Europe. Later, the guitarra morisca, brought to Spain by the Moors, became popular in the 15th century. It in the 15th century, it had 4 strings. The lutes became popular in the 16th century, and they had 5 strings. Italy was the center of the guitar world during the 17th century, and the Spanish school of guitar making only began to flourish in the late 18th century after the addition of the 6th string. Guitar music became especially popular in Spain, and Antonio de Torres developed the Spanish guitar in its modern form. While most of the credit for the early development of the acoustic guitar goes to the Europeans, today's steel string acoustic guitars were developed in America during the early 20th century, when the European immigrants were coming to America in droves. There were guitar craftsmen on board that had made many of the guitars, but mainly 2 types. They were the flat-top guitar and the arch-top guitar. Martin and Gibson were 2 of the earliest and the most influential American acoustic guitar makers. The modern guitars have 6 strings, and the modern guitars have 6 strings. And a Spanish guitarist, Andreas Segovia, who lived from 1893 to 1987, helped establish the guitar as a concert instrument, adapting to the complex music of modern composers. Acoustic guitars are used most often in folk and jazz music, but are also common in other music too. The classical guitar. Francisco Tárrega was a famous classical guitarist in early 14th century. He helped make one of the first classical guitars, and soon it's been made differently. The history of the classical guitar began in Spain in the 14th century and has progressed throughout the years to today's modern guitar, bringing its beautiful classical music to the world. It started out as a guitar with only 2 strings and now can go up to 20 or 30 strings if anyone wanted it to. Lastly, the electric guitar. The 16th and 17th centuries saw the guitar become popular in other European countries. The sound of the electric guitar strings is both amplified and manipulated electronically by the performer. The American musician and inventor developed prototypes for the solid bodies electric guitar. Electric guitars gained popularity with the increase in number of rock and roll bands. The electric guitars became necessary to compete with the larger bass sections, commonly used in jazz orchestras, especially the big bands in the 30s and 40s. All guitars have evolved from being simple, hollow, arch-top bodies to state-of-the-art music equipment. So now you have learned about many types of guitars and a bunch of history on them. I hope you start lessons soon. Thank you.
So, speeches for today finished. Great job, everyone. You're getting better and better. And I understand there were some pretty interesting subjects of speeches for your groups, and that's wonderful. The next speech we're going to give